This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
By track record, my guest today, Mike Cox, should need no introduction. Mike Cox is a two-time Michigan Attorney General. And unlike during the Snyder and Whitmer years, where we pick one-party trifectas as governor, attorney general, and secretary of state, back then in the Granholm era, we used to mix and match. So it was on the 2002 ballot when Granholm took the governor's office and Cox won as attorney general. His opponent in 2002? Gary Peters, currently a U.S. Senator, last seen angling in vain for a VP appointment to run with Kamala Harris. And Peters is now retiring rather than go for a third term in the U.S. Senate. And so as Republicans look for their candidate for governor in 2026, certain qualifications you keep hearing, certain wants, certain wish list items you keep hearing about. One is political savvy. The other is business experience. Cox has both, and you can throw on public safety experience along with it. So it's not Cox's track record that he has to overcome, it's timing. The entirety of Mike Cox's career in politics took place before Donald Trump descended that escalator in 2015. And in 2026, he will face a Republican electorate that remains skeptical of the non-Trump and even the pre-Trump Republican. To an extent, a Rick Snyder even has that same problem. MAGA doesn't quite know what to make of Cox because his time in politics predates their interest in politics. And so if a track record with politics, business, and public safety makes Cox a unicorn in terms of qualifications, timing makes him a unicorn in terms of circumstance. And so despite being a two-time statewide office holder in Michigan, there's a lot of Michigan Republicans in 2026 who will be learning his name and his story for the first time, which is an opportunity. It's kind of the same boat Senator Eric Nesbitt is in as he tries to go from representing 200,000 people in his section of Michigan to the 10 million of Michigan. 2026, I talk about it all the time. The ultimate battle for Michigan. It's the most important election for our future. An incumbent hasn't lost a governor's race in Michigan since 1990. So that means whoever wins in 2026 will probably win again in 2030. And it's that slate that wins in 2026 that will appear alongside Senator Alyssa Slotkin on the 2030 ballot. 2026 is everything. If you lose it, it's tough to imagine Michigan being viable much longer. And so to that end, seeing and sensing how important 2026 is, Cox has put down $1 million of his own money to explore whether there's an appetite that he does run for governor. Mike, welcome to the Enjoyer Podcast.
I kind of like that intro.
Absolutely. Mike, let's hop right into it.
Sure.
Why are you considering a run for governor? Or it strikes me that you see 26 the same way I do, that win or find a new home.
Right now, for the past number of years, our state's been in managed decline. What do I mean by that, James? It's like both sides are kind of nibbling at the edges while the state is falling apart. And the whole thing is like, we have this awesome, incredible state. Yeah. We have, 10,000 lakes. We got 4 Great Lakes. We're on an international border. We have great beauty. What does Indiana have that we don't have?
Right.
Yeah, Indiana eats our lunch every single day. So people say, why are you running for governor? It's really simple for me. And you're a young guy, so maybe you get this. It's like, my granddaughters in Hernando, Mississippi get a better education than the kids down my street in Livonia, Michigan.
How could that be?
How could that be? My old man was a carpenter. My mom was a servant, right? Worked, she had a funny accent, so she got a job in Grosse Pointe, with the rich folks. And then she worked at a Stouffer's downtown when used to be a Stouffer's, when it wasn't just a frozen food. And they, when we grew up, when my brothers and I grew up, we were told we could be anything here in Michigan. Yeah. And yet that's gone by the wayside. I don't care who you are, we're in decline. But that being said, we still have some great assets. We still have a beautiful state. We're still on an international border. We We still have some great institutions. We just have to get past our fear, and we got to take a chance. And that's really the beauty of Donald Trump, right? Coming down the escalator. Hey, I'll admit, I was a Bush guy on that day. I didn't really know much about Donald Trump, right? And I thought, Jeb Bush did some great things on education and freedom in Florida. But when I saw that first debate, in Cleveland, I said, this guy's something special. But, I was out trying to build a business then, and I wasn't in politics then. I was on my sabbatical, as my wife tells me. And so I appreciated a businessman who wanted to shake it up. And that's what we need here in Michigan.
Absolutely. Mike, what are you still exploring at this point? Should not the $1 million investment be read as a sign that he's running? Are you prepared to break news today on the Enjoyer podcast that you are officially running for governor?
Well, political consultants say you have to have this little video and this and that. Look, James, I don't put $1 million in to walk away. All right. I'm not announcing today, but I have a business and I got a couple things I got to get together, but I'm out most every night that I was following the Republican debate crew around, and I was popping up at all those places. So the grassroots are starting to see me again. And you're right. There are some who don't know me, but that's okay. I think MAGA Republicans want a guy who's going to shake it up. It's not afraid of his shadow.
Right.
Has some cojones.
Right.
And maybe they even like a guy with a Marine tattoo on his arm and a scar on his face. I don't know. We'll find out.
Mike, if you don't run, if you don't end up doing it, now winning's obviously something else, but if you don't run to begin with, why wouldn't you?
That's a great question, because this is a critical time in our state. Every election, politicians like to say this is the most important election in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
2026 won't be the most important election in the nation's future, but 2026 will, in fact, be the most important election for our state's future. And you touched on that on your introduction, right? So there's going to be an open Senate seat. Gary Peters, maybe you heard I was shutting down my business, and maybe he was afraid I was going to run against him again. I don't know. But nonetheless, it's not my deal. I care more about my state than I care about D.C. But so, the governor's race is going to impact what happens in the U.S. Senate race. And also, as you said, in 4 years after that, we're going to have the slotkin seat. So in a lot of ways, this election is the most important election for our state.
Yes.
It's also going to shape the Senate over the next number of years. And I want to be part of that. I want you to be part of that. I want all your listeners and viewers to be part of that, because we're going to have to build a team, right? And from the time I was a 19-year-old squad leader in the Marine Corps, I knew to get things done, I couldn't just be the corporal. I needed my squad, right? And ultimately, when I was a homicide prosecutor in Detroit, running all the homicide prosecutions, we had to have a team. We had a team of 14 lawyers, and we went out there as a team, and each one was in our own individual trial, but we talked to each other. We got together. We worked on things together. Right. And in the AG's office, I won by a squeaker, right? The closest statewide race since World War II, even tighter than President Trump's in 2016. But I had to build a team. And, we had Governor Granholm we had to fight against. Terry Lynn Land and I had to take up the slack, and we did. And so we built a team, keep the Republican Party relevant during the time of the lost decade. Or I should say, perhaps the first lost decade, because I think we're now in a second lost.
It's incredible that we've had two lost. I'm 40. I'm going to be 41 next month. We've had two lost decades in my lifetime. That's half my life.
Yeah. And James, listen to this. So my daughter, Lindsay, was in the Marines, right? She joined the Marines after 9/11. I hated the idea, even though I was a Marine rifleman. And so when she was getting out in 2007, she married a guy from Mississippi. And she calls me up from California. She says, "Dad, I'm moving to Mississippi." I said, "Honey, bring him back home to Michigan." She said, Dad, but, the economy's better in Mississippi right now. And Haley Barber, and it was true. The economy was looking
Economy's
better.
better in Mississippi. I find that sentence and that sentiment disturbing.
It was
Especially that
disturbing.
it's true.
But it's true. But here was my argument. I said, honey, but how are your kids going to grow up and get educated in Mississippi? Because you're a few years younger than I am, James. But when you were growing up, you heard about people growing up in Arkansas or Louisiana or Mississippi, and you thought, come on.
It was a byword for uneducated.
Yes, it was kind of I'm not going to swear, but it's kind of like Buffalo land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, they shot passes. And my granddaughters, one who's in special ed, her school, she's autistic, so she was half mainstream, half full day. And when COVID came along, they shut down 3 weeks. In 2019, 2020, remember we shut down from like March 18th on.
For the rest of the year.
And then only 1/3 of Michigan students the following school year got to go. 1/3 the following school, 2020, 2021, got the opportunity to have in-class teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, my little boo down in Mississippi, she's progressing on. Now she's mainstream, and she's going to be able to make a living for herself. And that's the shame of Michigan today. Again, we have some great assets, and I know as building a Republican team, we can make a difference in our state.
So basically, there's not a reason you wouldn't run.
Basically, you're right. I got a few business things to take care of. I expect you're going to hear from me. Give me 5-6 weeks. We'll get in. It's a little nicer here to travel around, and a little spring in the air. Maybe
Right.
Michigan State's made a nice run in the tournament, and be good vibes. And I think announcement of the next governor of Michigan will be exciting stuff.
Absolutely. Let's walk down memory lane for a quick second.
All right.
You did beat Gary Peters in 2002, the year I graduated high school.
Yeah.
By 5,200 votes. You're the only person to ever beat Gary Peters statewide. What do you recall about that race?
Hey, I got up every morning. Hey, it's like I got in the race because a couple people talked to me. It was a long shot, but I was kind of like, I have nothing to lose, kind of like right now, right?
Right.
And I got out every single day, and I hit it, right? And I talked about my ideas, and I talked about public safety. I talked about making a difference in little kids' lives. One of the issues was child support, right? And about the things that the Attorney General could do to make a difference in the state. And ultimately, I touched enough voters, and it made a difference. And what I learned from that is I got through because of grassroots activists going out and telling people, go vote for this guy. And so I'm still part of those I was a district chair. I was a county chair. I was a precinct delegate. So, I have a lot of love for the activists that gathered in Detroit this weekend to elect Jim Runstead. And so I have a connection with them, right? And I met, maybe not all of them remember me, but that's okay. But I got up every day. It was I know you're a wrestler, right? And you can't hide. You can't hide in the herd. So if you play football or maybe in the legislature, you can hide in the herd sometime. If you miss a block, no one notices.
Right.
And you're out there on a mat, and it's the third round. Everyone's staring at you, and that's how I felt. So I got up every single day, and it was the third round every single day, and I had to take shots to make a difference to win. And so that's what I did. Fear's a great motivator.
Absolutely. What was your reaction to Mike Duggan running as an independent? I thought that was, I on one hand, I say Mike Duggan did something that was thought to be impossible by winning a primary election as a write-in candidate in Detroit as a white guy. But on the other hand, we have this, straight ticket voting habit that's been pretty ingrained at this point. It opens you to 2 attacks on both sides. Is this clever or too clever by half?
I think it's the only thing he could do. but there'll be two Democrats. If he does it, there'll be two Democrats on the ballot, right?
Right.
It'll be him and probably Jocelyn Benson.
I call him the trans independent.
Yes. So it'll be one Republican versus two Democrats, and I kind of like those odds. And look, he had nowhere else to go. He's a stone cold 40-year Democratic boss,
Right.
Okay. And in the city of Detroit I wasn't surprised that he was elected because, for years, you probably know, I was in recorder's court. I was a prosecutor for 13 years. And most days I walked in the court, I was the only white dude in the courtroom. It was black folks as judges, witnesses, victims, police officers. So I know that black folk, African American, they'll listen to you if you're talking to them and not patronizing. So apparently he did that. He got through. But here's the reality. I don't want to say it this. Well, I will say it this way. Donald Trump was right when he said, if you vote for Kamala Harris, you're more likely to get the state of Michigan to look like Detroit. And look, that is not a slam on the folks of Detroit. But the reality is, Mike Duggan's Detroit still has the third highest violent crime rate in America. It still has the highest tax rate in Michigan. Dave Bing or Ken Cockrell had gotten $10 billion taken off the balance sheet through a bankruptcy, right. and then were supplemented with extra cash by the state to the tune of $2 billion. They would look like great mayors as well. But I think Michigan doesn't want the tired old ideas of 40 years ago. They got Wayne County in trouble. And I mean, just last year, he was talking about bringing back the 13 check. And I know a lot of people out there in the rest of Michigan say, 13 check, what's that? Well, that's where you pay retired public employees a 13th bonus check if the market's doing good. But then when the market goes down, you don't take the check back away. And that's how municipal pensions crash. And so the reality is Mike Duggan hasn't learned anything from that. So to answer your question, is like running against two Democrats, that's okay.
And I just don't get it. We've heard so much about Mike Duggan's instincts and his political skills, but then I see a guy who acts with a lack of faith. He abandons his lifelong party because they lose a single election. And then Jocelyn Benson implodes. She's not doing well as a candidate. Had Mike Duggan just stuck it out where he was, he'd probably be the top Democrat by now.
Could be, but that's not my problem. Like I said, on the campaign trail, I underestimate no one, right? So, in my mind, either one of them's going to be a heavyweight until I beat them, but I'm going to beat them. And, and how am I going to do that, James? I'm not going to talk mealy mouth and word salad to the folks of Michigan. The reality is we're in trouble. So we need to throw some punches. It's like that wrestling match. You're down a little bit. And so you need a near fall, right? Get Michigan back on the road to victory.
You need feet to back. You need to take someone to their back, not just a takedown. Yeah,
absolutely. And so how are we going to compete? Look, I think Donald Trump's going to move this country forward over the next 2 years, but that's the whole nation. So what are we going to do here in Michigan? Well, we got to step up and we got to say, I'm not going to make any excuses to go out and work for the Republican ticket, because this Republican ticket's going to say, let's reinstate right to work. All right. Which told the rest of the country, Michigan is open for business, meaning you can come here, you can create jobs, and we're not going to tell you, we're not going to interfere between you and your employees and your colleagues. Number two is there are 9 states in America right now that have eliminated the tax on work, which really means eliminate the income tax, right? And so you look at Indiana, Ohio. What do they have in terms of natural beauty? Or what do they have compared to us? They're not an international board, but they have a lower income tax, and they're thriving compared to us. So one thing I want to do is eliminate the tax on work. Let's call it what it is, right? Can that happen on day one? Maybe not. But you know what? We could if we could eliminate for lower paid folk right away, right? I was thinking about it this way, because I had someone come, well, how are you going to be able to do that? I said to this person the other day over the weekend at the convention, and I said, do you realize that Governor Whitmer in just 6 years has increased the state share of spending by $12 billion from 34 and change up to 47 and change? That would pay for eliminating the income tax. That alone, that number. But here's the reality. We have challenges. One is, number one, how do we fix the fundamentals like schools? And number two is, how do we make ourselves look more attractive? To be that state when my dad hitchhiked down to Sarnia, walked across the Blue Water Bridge, and came down to Michigan to visit a sponsor, and said, I want to be here because the streets of Detroit and the streets of Michigan are paved with gold. Like, we can do that again. I think too many folks have settled on this whole idea like it's a rule of physics. It's a rule of physics that we have to fail, that we have to keep losing.
Yes.
Right? And it's not. We can change it. And so, anyway, I got
the example I use, I have to talk about this constantly because on Twitter, I try to cultivate a very smart feed, but even then, Republicans in Michigan are just overrun with this idea that every election is stolen. I mean, Republicans just did well in November, and they think that was stolen because Mike Rogers didn't win. And I just worry that kind of cynicism undercuts the work that's necessary to win. My example is Michigan Republicans need to be like Michigan football was in 2021.
Right.
What do? You haven't beat Ohio State since 2011. They have better players. They've won a national championship. They've been dominant. They're in your head psychologically. What do? You win anyway. How do Republicans, because everyone talks about the elections, to me, you have to win it to fix it. How do we get that win anyway mentality out there?
You're absolutely right. That being said, look, election integrity is important.
It is.
The Trump campaign, the RNC, hired me to be their election day counsel here in the Eastern District, right, to go to court with some other lawyers from Dickinson Wright. We were prepared for that, right? And I was a lawyer for Unlock Michigan when we wanted the Court of Appeals, and we wanted the Supreme Court to keep that moving forward when the Democrats tried to get it off the ballot. Ultimately, on a different case, the Supreme Court eviscerated the Emergency Powers Act. But so I don't want to downgrade election integrity. That being said, having been through winning by less than vote per precinct, I realize that sometimes you just have to fight through it, brother. You just have to hammer it. To your point, at some point, Jim Harbaugh and the rest of the team had to say, we have to get past this mental block and say, no matter what, we're going to get it done. And we have a great opportunity because no matter what, in 2026, voters are going to say, how do we get here? And they're going to look at the two Democrats, Mike Duggan and Sheriff Swanson, or Mike Duggan and Secretary Benson, and say, oh, I know. And they're going to say, we need a new plan. And that's going to be with the Republicans. And we need execution. So it's not just, and you're right, like on Twitter, it's Twitter's or X is a little bit of a grievance thing, right? You point out what other people are doing wrong. But that's because I have a lot to, but the flip side is we got to get something done, right? So that's the one thing I learned as a 19-year-old in the Marine Corps, right? If you had a little responsibility, you had to get the team, to rush that hill, or as AG, despite Governor Granholm, we had to get things done. So as an executive, for instance, Republicans always say we do more with less. Well, I cut the people size, the personnel size of the AG's office 20% when I was in, because that's a Republican virtue. So when we get in there, this isn't a war on public servants, but I was able to do most of it through atrophy. I had to do some layoffs. But here's the reality, James, and I'm getting a little carried away. But, there are more state employees, I think 1,500 more than there were 7 or 8 years ago. A 6% growth. And you think about think about the technological advances over the past 5-6 years, even pre-AI and now AI.
Right.
And this Whitmer administration has added employees when we're losing population. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So we're going to need someone who, when they get the mantle, when they win the race, is going to show the people of Michigan why it matters to pick a Republican. And
yes,
if I run, air quotes, I will be that guy.
As I see it, the battle for the Republican Party, for its soul, for its future, it's not what the principal's first people try to portray. They want to make it sound like there's Reagan on one pole and Trump on another.
Right.
I don't think it is. I see Romney on one pole and Trump on another. I see on one hand a destiny where you're the honorable, lovable loser who almost apologizes when he wins. This is the Bill Buckley mindset.
Right.
Standing athwart history, yelling stop, which even as you hear that told, implies that someone else is driving the train. Versus a Trump, taking the reins, running your own agenda. So how do you win in this Trump world, but where Trump's not going to be on the ballot himself personally?
Right. Well, I think, look, the president's awesome, and he deserves all the praise he gets, but no one is Trump. And so you can't imitate Trump, right?
Yes.
You got to be your own true self, good, bad, or indifferent, right? And you don't win by 5,200 votes the first time by being cuddly and lovable. You do it by being a fighter, right? So you have to be legit, though. So, for instance, when you were graduating from high school, there was a big case, Gratz versus Bollinger.
Oh,
as
yeah.
affirmative action up in front of the United States Supreme Court. And first month in office, Jennifer Granholm tells me, I want you to support the University of Michigan, right? So perpetuate affirmative action. And I said no. And 2 days later, there's a big Detroit News article, your alumni paper. They had me versus Gerald Ford. And I was one month in the office, and I was fighting with Gerald Ford over affirmative action.
Holy cow.
Didn't change, right? And so I refused to do it. And as you probably know, I helped Jennifer Gratz and Ward Connerly get MCRI passed in 2006. And so the issue of DEI isn't anything new to me, right? Because I know that it's about commonality. I don't care who you are. If I give you an opportunity, I treat you with respect in America, and you can move forward. And DEI is about splitting people apart. It's about taking one group of taxpayers and take their money to promote another group of taxpayers and put them ahead. It lacks any sense. So the president hit it, and it was a winning issue for him. But it was an issue that I lived 10, 15 years ago. Same thing with illegal immigration. My parents are immigrants, right? What? Illegal is illegal to me, right? So in 2007, when we found out that Michigan was issuing licenses to illegal aliens, I worked with Terry Lynn Lamb. I issued an opinion, and she went right along with it and was thankful that stopped that. And subsequent, this stuff was heating up. During the Obama administration, there was a Governor Brewer who wanted to, this crazy idea, wanted to empower Arizona police officers to be able to stop and arrest illegals who came across the border in Arizona because the Obama administration wasn't doing anything about it.
Right.
Her AG win defender. So I organized a group, which included Greg Abbott, and we led the group to help defend Jan Brewer. And ultimately it prevailed at the United States Supreme Court. So the issues that I think regular non-elitists care about, because here's the reality. I live in Livonia, right? I've done well for myself, but I live in Livonia. I'm not, my brother-in-law still works the line building F-150s in Dearborn truck. My cousins are all in the trades or laborers. My brothers and I did a little bit better, but we all worked hard. So I understand the working man and women. The thing is like every dollar they got a gun and they have to look out for stuff. I'm not too far removed from, like I said, I got a Marine Corps tattoo, and when I walk around with the T-shirt, I just look like the regular Joe. And I still feel that. It hasn't changed from the time I grew up in, a 975-foot square house in Redford.
You and Mike go back to the mean streets of Livonia, back to Detroit Catholic Central, where I think there was overlap there, right? I mean, how long have you?
He was there before I was.
He was before you. Okay.
4 or 5 years older than me. So now when I was a kid, kids who moved to Livonia, we thought, wow, they had houses with second stories on.
Right.
That was like the big
right.
one. But now I and it was Detroit Catholic Central, and I was there. So
yeah, now it's Novi Catholic Central.
Yeah.
But help people understand. I think some people, I call Mike the trans independent. And obviously I don't view him as genuine in that move. I view him as a guy who abandoned his party, who abandoned his wife when it was convenient. But as someone who knows this guy and has for a long time, please help people understand that Mike Duggan is not just playing spoiler. He could win. He is a threat.
Well, so I was a career prosecutor in Wayne County, right? Working for John O'Hare, who hired me. And in 2000, Duggan got elected as a new prosecutor. So after 11 years, he came in. And so he was my boss for 2 years. And he was a smart dude. And he always called me the Republican in meetings, right? And it was like nervous laughter. But so, do I hang out with him or know him that well? No. But I do respect his political talent, which is the thing that you point out. And that's why, I don't take him lightly. So I think generally independents, when they run, they pull highest at the beginning and they start shrinking over time. But the reality is, I don't know why the people who vote Republican, or even most independents, why would they support a guy, who still is about pay, instead of cutting taxes for the working man and woman, about putting more money into career bureaucracy. He's not going to stand up. He's not going to stand up to the school industrial complex to fix Michigan's education. Remember, he ran the EA for a while, right? Which did nothing for Detroit public school students.
Right.
When he was there, it had like 70,000 more students. Check this out this year, James. You know about how Governor Whitmer is trying to underfund every chance to get underfund charter schools.
Yeah.
So did you hear the mayor of Detroit speak out about that? No. But consider this. Of the kids who live in Detroit proper, 45% of them go to charter schools. So the mayor of Detroit didn't speak up for those 45% of the kids in his city. That's an abomination. That's a civic sin. That's not taking care of the kids and the families within your area. And that's why, as you know, probably during his time, they've lost 60,000 during his decade in power.
Yeah.
That's 100,000 African-American families moving out and being replaced by 30 or 40,000 white kids, including one of my kids, who are only going to be transient, right? They're not going to stay and buy a home in Detroit and send their kids to school there. So, Detroit has moved forward, but it's really moved forward because of Dan Gilbert and Snyder's bankruptcy. This isn't like Rudy Giuliani changing the ethos right in the 90s.
To me, there's no comeback story in Detroit. There's absolutely none. You look at the water main break. You look at, someone trying to call a homeless line and can't get through, and the kids died before I heard back from anyone. There's just, you look at the Charlie LaDuff story recently.
Right.
Over the Duggan tenure, I call them the Detroit 300. 291 bodies just removed because we decided it's a justifiable, so we're not going to present those numbers. There's no Detroit success story, and I fear that a lot of normie Republicans think of Duggan as not as crazy as a typical Democrat, and they view Detroit as a city they can visit now, and they might be inclined to give him outsized credit for that.
And all I would say to any of those folks who say that, well, you should vote for him if you feel like you want to move to Detroit.
That's the pop quiz I offered after Trump said what he said and everyone was pretend offended. All right, pop quiz. I live in Southfield. You live in Livonia. Do you want your community to be more like Detroit or less like Detroit? Ask it that way and people see it so clearly, so quickly.
And I don't want to sound negative, but that's the reality. So it's like, are we going to deal in reality or platitudes? Are we really committed to moving the state forward, or are we going to like pretend what we've seen with our own eyes hasn't happened? Are we going to pretend that we're now in shatters? In Livonia, one of my neighbors who's a teacher told me, now if a kid doesn't turn in a paper on Wednesday, you can't mark it down until the end of the day on Friday. I have a friend who teaches Yes, I have a friend who teaches in Westland and says, if a kid doesn't turn in an assignment, you can't mark it as a 0. You have to mark it as a 50. Why? Because the kids are smart. They game the system. They know how to pass. And so when they go out to work, where are they? Right?
Oh my God. I went to Wayne Westland schools, and the reason we did not continue, so I go to Wayne Westland schools all my life. And then when it comes time to, for high school, I go to John Glenn my first year. So I'm part Rocket. Then we moved to Detroit, West Side. And the neighborhood school would have been Mumford High School. Wasn't ever going to happen. And then, who would drive from Detroit to Westland to go to John Glenn? So that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And so we wound up at West Bloomfield. It was a life-changing opportunity to go to that high school. And it's tragic to me that mentality you just described, where market as a 50 and all these, these downgraded punishments and no one can ever fail. Those kids are being set up to fail in the real world beyond the schools.
Look, down in Hernando, Mississippi, my granddaughters, Gracie and Savannah, they're not coddled that way, right? And Mississippi, and it's just not Mississippi, but for me, Mississippi is easy because that's where my family is right now, right? And so in Mississippi, you're not coddled. And by the way, if you took every demographic group, well, let me pull back for a second. They're blowing us away in 4th grade reading and math. So that tells you the direction of their education system, right? 8th grade, they're kind of like tied. But Mississippi spends less per pupil than Michigan does. And at every demographic level, social economic status level, they beat us. And if the voters of Michigan don't get offended by that and want to make a serious change, then we'll have lost this opportunity, James, that I've seen you talk about so many times with 2026.
Absolutely. As a pre-Trump Republican,
right?
How does that go? To me, I look at MAGA as a third-party movement that overtook the Republican Party, just like I would say communists have overtaken the Democrat Party. So basically, we have 2 third parties that have overtaken the real 2. But as your career was pre-Trump, as you step into this MAGA world, how does that go? What do people want to know from you?
So it's just like they just want to know you, right? And my views haven't changed, right? So I was a Tea Party guy in 2010, right? And there was other conservatives, and Rick Snyder won.
A precursor for Trump, yeah.
And to me, Trump is the Tea Party with the skills and the wiles of having been a reality TV star for 11 years, right? That's why I only never tried to compete with the president. He's too good. But Trump is really just the Tea Party ideas of what makes common sense, constitutional sense, embodied in Donald Trump. And so, whether it's like focus on lowering taxes for working men and women, focus on, enough, the wokeism and getting, the whole idea of buying into like some under 18-year-old kid who's going through puberty, we're going to supplement them to get, become transgender, knowing that people, male men, they're not fully mature if they're ever mature. Scientists tell us until age 25. And so
my brain stopped developing last week.
Yes.
It's a delayed process.
Exactly. So it's like Trump is just the Tea Party commonsensical Republican in my mind, but he advocates, and to your point, he doesn't accept losing, right? So he's like, enough of giving up when we lose a vote. Let's go back and let's win it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's who I am. So I'm not too worried about it when I'm back out campaigning. People get that, right? It's just.
I think that connection is fascinating because, so you look at the Tea Party movement, 2009, 10, and then who's the next Republican candidate? I mean, really, you could say the same thing about both parties, and I'd say that's why both parties have been overtaken, right? So you have Occupy Wall Street on the left, and then they have Obama as the candidate.
Yeah.
Kind of a disappointment. Then you have the Tea Party on the right, and the candidate in 2012 is Mitt Romney. Not exactly your standard bearer. So I think it took until 2016 for that to shake out and for the personification to show up.
You're right. And if you remember, Rick Santorum lost, virtually tied Romney in 2012 in Michigan, right? And he was a little more Trump-esque, right? And so you're right. It took a little while for that to shake out. And they're great analogies that you're bringing up, because it's like it was screw capitalism, and then you got Obama, and then you got the Tea Party, and you got Romney, and I just think Trump is like the fruition. And if like I've been fans for years of watching Steve Bannon on all these interviews, on YouTube, and that dude's crazy in a great way. Because he's a provocateur on purpose. But I remember him talking about he was trying to recruit somebody like Trump, and he talked with Trump before 2012, and Donald Trump knew it wasn't the right time then, because he has this innate political sense. And
why face an incumbent when you could, face an open seat?
Right. And I think he was still like killing it on his TV show. Right.
He did milk a few more years out of that.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? He learned, and you can say, well, politics is becoming a reality TV show, or you can say, regular folks are able to be closer to the candidates they elect.
Yes. And that's the thing. This is what democratization, which we've heard so much about, especially in the early 2000s, that's what it looks like. And I think one of the sins of Donald Trump is, one, he won in 2016 without the permission of the Uniparty. And two, if you make politics accessible, these guys aren't trying to be bothered about omnibus bills, and they're supposed to be able to just pass whatever they pass.
Right.
They're not supposed to be hounded by the average person saying, why don't we have one-page spending bills?
Yeah, it's kind of funny with Doge, right? I bet there's a lot of people in Congress now say, what? Trump or Musk is finding the things I'm for and wondering, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But, it's, and the whole thing, to your point, is like, why can't we simplify things? Well, then it's when you simplify, it's harder to hide things, right? That's the reality.
Right.
And Donald Trump, if nothing else, he carries, like Cro-Magnon man, he carries that big flame, and he uses it either as a weapon or to shine a light on things, and that's okay. And I think Musk is doing that. Look, at the end of the day, If Musk can't hit his targets, then he can't hit his targets. But shouldn't we applaud the effort? Shouldn't we want folks to start considering, like, are these programs really necessary? Why is it that the District of Columbia, I think this is the acronym number, only 5% of the federal employees were going to work every day? 5%? Or you think about state government. Why do the men and women in the Department of Corrections, and I'm talking to the Michigan Corrections Officers Union, right? Those folks ought to be saying, why do we have to go to work every day in a physical place and no one else does?
Yes.
Is it that half the public employees in Michigan have a remote option, but only 1 out of 10 do? Now, I'm not saying there can't ever be reasons for remote. I mean, we shouldn't, as Republicans, we shouldn't be against innovation. But look, public servants ought to be where we can find them, right? And if I can't go and find my public servant, that's a problem, And so, I mean, that's besides right to work, besides eliminate the tax on work, deconstruct the regulatory state. First and foremost, a matter of equity is we have to have state employees return and make their workplace look like the rest of Michigan.
Well, plus that office space isn't free.
It is not free.
So you need to make good on that investment or cancel the leases. I don't really care which at this point, but what we cannot have is what we have now, which is the expensive downtown property leased, which no one then uses.
And here's the other thing. So you're in an industry where you can work with your folks the producer and stuff, right? And you're a purveyor of news and distiller and you write things, but that you're kind of unique that way, right? And you have an excellent talent for it. And in a lot of ventures, you need to work as a team. And so if the team's never shown up to work, you don't get the benefit of the new or young person who might have a new idea or the old fart who's seen some things before. And that part of that is like, could you imagine having a football team remotely? Can you do public schools remotely No, you can't. We already learned that. And so a lot of ventures in life, you need to be around coworkers to learn and work as a team and get better. And certainly in public service, that's by and large the truth.
We talk about this, how in Michigan, certainly this century, it's not just candidates, especially governors who win races, whether it's governor or even the presidency on the ballot. Typically, there's a ballot initiative right there alongside them. The only time I can think of someone losing with a favorable ballot initiative that passed is 2006. The governor's race, affirmative action passes, but Dick DeVos loses. But Granholm's an incumbent, so of course she was going to win.
Right.
What would you like to see accompany you as far as a ballot initiative on the 2026?
I think the easiest one, it's a commonsensical thing, but I think we need it because every 2 years the Democrats want to get rid of photo ID identification, right? And I think photo ID to vote makes sense. And it's probably, I haven't pulled, it's probably 80-20 proposition. And those people go out to vote for that, they're going to say, well, let me think a little bit more. I care about this issue because, when I go to Costco, I got to show them a photograph.
Every single time.
Costco, I got to show a photograph.
I can't even get a hot dog without showing my photo and that I'm a member.
Yes. It's like, and who wants to do without the big hot dog or those great big fat pieces of pizza at Costco, right? It's like, you need a photo ID for Costco. You should need it if you vote. And
I find the whole way Democrats talk about that issue to be disturbing and infantilizing, because they act like they're the vanguard of the black community. And they would have you think that there's all these black people out there without ID because they don't know how to get ID.
Yeah.
And so rather than say, what the state government need to do to make sure every adult who lives in Michigan that we know of has an ID that's usable. You can even do it as an appropriation if you want. But you notice they don't ever do that?
Absolutely not. It is so patronizing. Look, I'd love to say this. I still occasionally get carded. Now, it's only if
For what?
to buy alcohol, of course, right? Now, I know it's some policy. I'm not delusional, right? But my 20, it's going to be 25 in 2 days. Year old Navy officer's son. He's got red hair and looks really pale, so he looks younger. He gets carded a lot, and if he's a 25-year-old naval officer running a weapon system on a destroyer, if he gets carded to buy a 6-pack of beer, and that's not a problem for him. Come on.
Right.
And to your point, it's like, oh, we're protecting the vulnerable. No, you're not. It's like everyone who, you tell them you need a photo ID, they'll go out and get it. That's the way the world works.
You want them to remain vulnerable and broken so you can position yourself as their forever defender, which also means that anyone who wants to fix their plight is in your way. They're your enemy.
Absolutely.
So if you said, I'm going to make sure these people all have IDs who need them, they'd find a way to make you the bad guy because they want it to be nebulous. And they want some element of, well, we don't really know who's voting.
Yeah, it really, the Democratic Party is really the party of feudalism, right? You're in I don't know, 8th grade history or high school history, you learn about the Middle Ages and feudalism, the lords and knights. It's like, Jocelyn Benson and Governor Whitmer fancy themselves to be lords or ladies or Mike Duggan, right? They want to have control. It's like Republicans, we want everyone to be able to make up their own mind by and large, right? Within reason, right? Society, we give up certain things to join society, but we don't give everything up. We don't give up the right to think. We don't give up the right to predetermine. We don't give up the right to how we educate our kids, or that we're the parent to the kid. And so it's time to get rid of feudalism in Michigan. And 2026 is the year to help do that.
I think about 2010, so you're coming off, 2 terms as AG. Now you're running in a primary and not a convention race.
Right.
And then this outsider, newcomer to politics, Rick Snyder, comes in, wins the primary, then wins the election as governor. You come in third. In retrospect, as you think about what happened in 2010, what did happen?
It was the 5-way primary, right? In one-on-one polling, they always do this. I would have won. But, it's not hand grenades and not horseshoes. And that's
you got Stephen Douglas. This is what the Democrats did in 1860. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and all your viewers, I hated it, right? And for a couple of years, I go to bed crying. Sometimes actually crying. But, I'm not especially religious. I try to make mass every Sunday, but I don't pat myself on the back. But in some ways, it was a little providential because I had a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old. In retrospect, if they were going through their teenage years or high school wrestling, both my boys wrestled, my girls ran cross country and track, it probably would have been harder on them. Now they're grown up, and unfortunately, James, 3 of them live outside of Michigan. So, maybe I can coax 1 or 2 back if I'm the governor of Michigan. That's my plan.
Have the Cox kids been pulled into the brain drain problem?
Yeah.
Have they left because they don't feel like there's opportunity for them, or is it just that their life took a different course?
Well, I will tell you, I told you about my oldest, Lindsay, right? Coming out of the Marines, her husband said, let's go back to Mississippi. And the jobs were better then. And I said, no, education.
Family is what's going to move you to Michigan or Mississippi if you don't already live there.
Now, my other 3, I got 2 in play. My one daughter, her career requires her to be in Chicago. But I'm trying to get to 50%. And I bet most parents out there watching your show, hey, if we can get 50%, that's a win. But we're going to do better than that because, hey, Indiana, Ohio, come on. It's like, even like Tennessee, Kentucky, you go there, they're flat, boring lands. We got natural beauty. We got water. We got an international border. We just don't have the will. to your point, you were talking about the will to win. Forget about the excuses.
Yeah.
Well, Republicans, we have to have the will to win, like we did this past year. If we do that, we're going to win a lot more on population loss, on our economy. It's not going to happen overnight, but as a team and consistent effort, and the one thing I can say, and I hope when I meet voters, is when I was AG, I wasn't afraid, right? Because I learned early as a homicide prosecutor, even before in boot camp, right? It's like if you think you're in the right, you got to move forward. And when I was in a homicide prosecutor, a lot of tough decisions, and I had to try every case, right? So we lost them, and that created a thick skin. So politics was really pretty easy after that. I mean, none of my losses in politics could match the feeling of hugging a family whose loved one had been murdered after a jury returned a not guilty or a lesser charge, or a young woman or an old woman, or sometimes a 7-year-old boy in a sexual assault case. And to me, that was a blessing that I never realized. So I got the politics because, that stuff on a more visceral level was more important to those folks than what you do as an elected official. So but they gave me the ability to be in politics, to say, I want to do the right thing. One thing, John Engler wasn't crazy about me becoming AG, and I wasn't his choice. But after I got in, he gave me a great line. He goes, Mike, now you know how hard it is to win. You ought to want to do something. And I'm doing this to do something. I haven't given up on our state, and none of us should, because we got a lot going on if we just get the feudalism out of the way.
Why didn't Engler want you? Was it that he wanted someone else, or did you guys have some kind of misunderstanding at that point?
It's a mix of things. I was a nobody, right? It's like, why would people want some homicide prosecutor in Detroit to be the attorney general? I thought it made a lot of sense.
A Republican from Wayne County, right? It just didn't make sense, right?
Makes sense. There wasn't many of us. As you know, if we could survive in Wayne County, we could certainly survive in Lansing. But that's water under the bridge. And he's a smart guy, and he gave me some good advice occasionally, which I always appreciate.
And I as I look at this ballot, and next year, I wonder, are you the Rick Snyder of the 2026 ballot? Have you been outside so long that now you're an outsider?
Well, I am an outsider. Look, the one thing, is, so I did have donors in 2009, 2010. They said, Mike, I like you. You're hardcore. You're fight for our principles, but you've never run a business. You don't know what it's like. Right. I said, well, yeah, you're right. I joined the Marine Corps, right? And then I became a homicide prosecutor. So how could I argue that? Well, it's like my wife told me after I lost. She said, the voters told you to go out and make some money, honey. And so I did. And it was a struggle. There have been times we'd mortgage our house. I've had to co-sign on loans. There's been times where I had a payroll of $71,000, and I look in my bank account 2 days before, and I got $4,000, right? And you gotta take care of people, pay my people's, pension, salary, Blue Cross. I pay 6 figures in Blue Cross every year. It's crazy, but it taught me a lot. And now I've been that outsider. God has been very great to me, and I want to use that and use what I learned in the private sector, use what I learned in the public sector to really move the state forward with other folks like Matt Hall and whoever the next Senate majority is going to be when Republicans run the table, and the next Republican Attorney General, the next Republican Secretary of State.
I used to talk to Laura back in the day when she was an elected official, and we still we'll text every once in a while from time to time. How is she with this? How is your wife with this?
She thinks I'm a little crazy, but
what else is new?
What else is new, right? We've had a great 30-year ride, and without either one of us like occasionally like poking each other, it wouldn't be nearly as fun. So it's she's looking forward to it, and like Candace Miller told me, hey, if you get in the race, Laura's like an old boxer, and when the bell goes off, she'll be right there throwing some punches with you. So we'll see. I can't tell that when the Laura kind of makes it. I mean, I told Candace she's a little too cute to be a boxer, but whatever.
Hopefully it's a one-sided fight if she's in it.
Yeah.
Mike, we'll get you out of here on this one. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
I like sitting in my backyard, right? I love the colors changing. I love the 4 seasons. I love this cold, right? I just, I've traveled all around the world. I've across, like, we just have normal folks here, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact my parents are here. My brothers are here. My brother-in-law, we get together, have a couple beers, talk about Michigan football, and life couldn't be better.
Right. That, to me, that is Michigan. Every single time I ask that question, it always comes back to family.
Right.
More so than the 4 seasons, more so than the physical beauty. Michigan is family. We're a state where something like 75% of the people who live here were born here.
Right.
So you see 4 people eating together. 3 of them are native to Michigan.
Yeah, and it's a kinship, right? It's like, and there's so much to do here. It's like my boys love hunting. Me, not so much. I was in the Marines. I haven't shot a rifle a whole lot since then.
Really?
I love the fact that they can go out and hunt whenever they want, right? I love the fact, my daughter, when she comes home from Chicago, she goes out to lake with her friends. That's cool, right? And I love the fact that we can go over to a foreign country really quick. There's like so much. I don't want to sound like a political consultant is supposed to tell me what you love about Michigan. But I just love hanging out in my backyard, having a couple beers, talking with my neighbors, because they're just all cool folk.
Absolutely. Mike, where can people learn more about yourself and your prospective candidacy?
All right. Well, I guess they can go on Twitter and Facebook. We'll have a website.
Mike, you got to tweet more.
Yeah.
You got to tweet more.
I'm getting there. I still got some business to take care of, so I'm part of getting me to the announcement. But my website will be www.mikecox2026, MikeCox2026.com. And pretty easy. And I look forward to having spending the next year and a half, 2 years, actually 10 years, talking to folks in Michigan and making this a better state.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time.
All right, James. Great seeing you again. You take care.